More than 2 years have elapsed since the tragic and enigmatic death of a beautiful and skilled Filipino flight attendant, discovered lifeless in a hotel bathtub after a New Year's Eve gathering with friends. This puzzling case has intrigued both local and international media, generating extensive speculation about the details of her death. It remains unclear whether her demise was an unfortunate accident or if it resulted from an assault that occurred that night in room 2209 of the hotel. Today, we take a closer look at the mysterious death of Christine De Serra. Born on April 13, 1997, Christine De Serra was a Philippine flight attendant employed by PAL Express. The second of 4 siblings, she graduated with honors in mass communication from the University of the Philippines Mindanao in Davao City. Despite her family residing in General Santos, Christine relocated to Manila for her career. Renowned for her beauty and talent, Christine had won several national beauty contests in 2019 and had moved to Manila to work with the Philippine airline. Her friends and colleagues describe her as a jovial and amiable individual in her personal life, yet serious and professional at work. On December 31, 2020, Christine opted to celebrate the new year with a close group of friends instead of returning home. She had a strong bond with a group of 5 from the LGBT community with whom she frequently partied and socialized. This New Year celebration was no exception. The group, consisting of Rommel, Clark, Valentine, Jigo, and John, booked room 2209 at the City Garden Grand Hotel in Macquarie for their festivities. John was the first to check in on the morning of December 31st, followed by Christine at noon, with the others joining later. Rommel invited 5 additional friends, all males from the LGBT community, named Ray, Louis, Mark, Jeremiah, and Edward. Meanwhile, a separate group of 13 rented the adjacent room 2207, with some acquaintances common to both parties. Around 10 p.m., their celebration commenced. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic and restrictions against gatherings, Christine and her friends indulged in alcoholic beverages like tequila and rum mixed with Coke, seemingly exempted from rules due to their connection with John Halili, the hotel manager who facilitated the event. At around 1:45 a.m., after finishing his shift, John joined the party. Surveillance footage from the 22nd floor corridor at 11:21 p.m. shows Christine and her group leaving their room and heading towards room 2207. By 11:38 p.m., Christine and her friends returned to their own room. Christine appeared to be in high spirits, carrying her shoes and holding a drink. Valentine later mentioned they went to room 2207 because they had mutual friends there. They engaged in a game of hip-hop hooray with Christine emerging as the winner. After returning to room 2209, they started taking photos and videos to post on social media. At 12:30 a.m., Christine called her family to wish them a happy new year and spoke with her mother for a while. At 2:50 a.m., Valentine and Christine visited room 2207 again, while a hotel employee delivered a mattress to room 2209. Just 2 minutes later, at 2:52 a.m., both Christine and Valentine returned to their room. Christine, appearing intoxicated, initiated a kiss with Valentine. Between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., Christine made several trips back and forth to room 22 of 7, but never stayed for long. Approximately every 10 minutes, one of Christine's friends from room 2209 would come over to bring her back. At 4:13 a.m., John visited room 2207 once again to bring Christine back, this time carrying her. Although intoxicated, Christine seemed coherent enough to unlock the door to their room. At 4:39 a.m., Valentine and Christine went back to room 2207. They returned to their room at 4:52 a.m., appearing to be in good spirits. At 5:05 a.m., Rommel went to room 2207 to bring Christine back, and they appeared to be playfully joking around. At 6:23 a.m., the last sighting of Christine was captured as Valentine carried her back into their room, with Christine being the one to open the door. At 7:23 a.m., some individuals from room 2207 started to leave the hotel. By 9 a.m., some friends from room 2209 began to depart as well. At 10 a.m., Rommel woke up to use the bathroom and found Christine lying in the bathtub. He tried to wake her, suggesting she should lie down on the bed for comfort. Christine was still breathing but had her eyes tightly shut. Rommel thought she seemed exhausted but was indicating with her hand for him to let her sleep. At least he believed so. Rommel noted that her hand was resting on her stomach. He then provided Christine with a blanket and pillow before returning to bed himself. By noon, Rommel went to the bathroom to wake Christine as they needed to check out soon. That's when he realized her lips had turned blue and she was no longer breathing. Panic-stricken, Rommel called for the others. At this point, only 5 people remained in the hotel: Jigo, John, Rommel, Valentine, and Clark. They immediately pulled Christine out of the bathtub and attempted CPR. Diego called for hotel staff and an ambulance. They were all terrified and frantic. Hotel staff arrived quickly to check and brought a wheelchair, which was too small and lacked footrests, making it difficult to place Christine, whose body had stiffened, onto it. Christine was taken to the hotel's clinic, but the doctor there could not revive her. They hurriedly transported Christine to Macquarie City Hospital, but it was too late. By 5 p.m., the hospital declared Christine deceased. The following day, January 2nd, 2021, Christine's body was transferred to Rizal Funeral Homes in Pasay City at 9 a.m. for an autopsy. The post-mortem examination concluded that the cause of death was an aneurysm caused by a ruptured aorta. According to the autopsy report, there were no traces of drugs or stimulants in Christine's system. However, 150 milliliters of a black liquid was found in her stomach. The autopsy results also indicated no semen traces were found on Christine's body, and her underwear contained only her DNA. The examination of her genital area revealed a tear in the hymen, which was old and nearly healed, indicating it was not a recent injury. The forensic report also noted multiple bruises on her right arm, right thigh, right ankle, and foot, and a fresh scratch on her left thigh. Notably, there were acupuncture marks on Christine's right hand. January 4th, 2021, the Philippine police announced to the media that they had solved the case, declaring it a gang rape and claiming semen traces were found on Christine's body. This statement caused public confusion as it directly contradicted the forensic report released the previous day, which clearly concluded there were no signs of rape. Despite this, the chief of the PNP announced it: the arrest of 3 men suspected of raping and killing Cristina, John de la Serra, Romel de Luro, and John Halili. However, everyone present at the hotel that night, especially Christine's close friends in room 2209, asserted their innocence, highlighting that they were all gay and had no sexual interest in women. They had known Christine for a long time and regarded her purely as a friend. Nonetheless, the police colonel believed the suspects could have sexually assaulted Christine and declared that regardless of their sexual orientation, men will be men, especially when intoxicated. This statement by the police sparked a divide in public opinion, with some believing the police's words and condemning Christine's gay friends, while others criticized the police for their sloppy and unprofessional work. The forensic report and investigation results were at odds, leading to widespread suspicion that the police had prematurely closed the case. Others blamed Christine, arguing that she dressed too provocatively and drank excessively without knowing how to protect herself. On January 4th, hashtags like Justice for Christine, Stop Blaming the Victim, and Protect Intoxicated Girls flooded social media. The Philippine police faced public backlash for embalming Christine's body before conducting the autopsy, which could significantly affect the accuracy of toxicological studies. Major Michael admitted embalming Christine without her family's consent, citing compliance with new regulations introduced post-COVID pandemic. Christine's family did not accept her death as a result of natural causes and requested another autopsy. Christine's mother sued the police for their negligence and unprofessionalism, believing the bruises on Christine's limbs were evidence of rape. However, Christine's friends explained that she had been excessively drinking that night, staggering and vomiting from 3:30 a.m. to 7 a.m. She vomited multiple times in the toilet and had been kneeling on the floor for a long time, which could explain the knee bruises. They said Christine was so intoxicated, she could not change her clothes and vomited all over herself and her hair. They cleaned up the vomit in the bathtub and covered her with a jacket. Since Christine continued to feel nauseous, she chose to stay in the bathtub instead of soiling the bed. They suggested the thigh bruise could have occurred as she clumsily climbed into the bathtub and the scratch on her thigh was from trying to place her on a trolley, but her body was stiff, causing her thigh to scrape against the trolley handle. However, Christine's mother did not believe these explanations. She argued that her daughter was young and healthy, especially since Christine worked for an airline and was regularly medically examined. She also pointed to a video showing Christine kissing Valentine before entering the room, suggesting it may have triggered dark intentions in the men. Meanwhile, Valentine insisted that Christine initiated the kiss, and it was merely a drunken moment. In another video, John is seen carrying Christine back to the room. In an interview, John explained they had to go to room 2207 numerous times to bring Christine back because she was too drunk and started vomiting there. He said, Christine suddenly became weak and couldn't stand, so he had to carry her. Christine's friends affirmed they only wanted to help her and had no intention of repping her. They also believed Christine was not reppied by the men from room 2207, as she never stayed there alone for more than 10 minutes, and she was normal when they brought her back. If Christine had been raped in room 2207, she surely would have told them. On January 5th, the Philippine National Investigation Bureau took over the case and conducted a second autopsy on Christine's body. Tissue samples were collected, and an attempt was made to extract fluid from her organs to determine whether she had been sexually assaulted. On January 6th, 3 of Christine's friends were released after the National Investigation Bureau ruled out homicide as the cause of Christine's death. After 2 autopsies, experts concluded that she died from a ruptured aorta. Christine had suffered cardiopulmonary arrest leading to the rupture. A medical report on January 11th also indicated that Christine's heart weighed 500 grams, whereas a normal heart weighs around 300 grams. This discovery suggests Christine had long-standing undiagnosed hypertension, which caused her heart to enlarge. Aortic aneurysms are typically associated with older individuals and arise from arteriosclerosis, but can also occur in younger people due to complications from other diseases. In Christine's case, increased blood pressure in the aorta led to its weakening and subsequent rupture. Hypertension can lead to various symptoms such as fatigue, nausea, and excessive sweating. It's possible that Christine and her friends mistook these symptoms for the effects of excessive drinking and a hangover, delaying urgent medical care. On April 27th, the police cleared the 11 men who were at the hotel with Christine that night of rape charges. Despite the Diaquera family's disbelief in the forensic results and multiple lawsuits filed, the police lacked sufficient evidence to charge her friends. Over a week after her death, Christine was returned to her hometown and laid to rest at Forest Lake Memorial Park in General Santos City. More than a year after Christine's passing, her friends appeared in a television interview. They shared how their lives were completely overturned since that tragic night. Although the charges were eventually dropped, finding new employment proved difficult for them. They faced relentless online attacks and vilification. Among them, Jigo endured the greatest hardship, having to sell his late mother's assets and grappling with chronic depression. Despite the damage to their reputations and careers from a crime they did not commit, the group remains determined to rebuild and move forward through the adversity. The pain experienced by Christine's family is beyond comprehension, and they seem unable to reconcile with the circumstances surrounding her death. Life is delicate and unpredictable. May we always treasure every moment with our loved ones. Lindsay Hawker was born on October 30th, 1984, in the United Kingdom. She was the middle child in a family of 3 daughters. The Hawker family was well-off, close-knit, and full of joy. Lindsay's parents were Bill and Julia. Her older sister was Louise, and her younger sister was Lisa. From an early age, Lindsay was known for her kindness and hard work, always eager to assist those around her. In 2006, she excelled in her studies and graduated as the top student in biology from the University of Leeds. Life seemed incredibly bright and promising for Lindsay. Lindsay is an independent and adventurous young woman. Thus, she wishes to spend several years of her youth experiencing life in various countries around the world before settling down to family life and stability. Consequently, after graduating from university, Lindsay has decided to move to Japan to teach English. Her boyfriend, Ryan, also plans to join her there a year later. A year on, Lindsay easily secured a position at Koiwa School in Tokyo, one of the biggest private schools in Japan. It appeared that Lindsay quickly adapted to her new life. She lived with 2 female colleagues, also teachers at the school. Daily, she would cycle to the train station, catch the train to work, and return in the same manner. Lindsay regularly stayed in touch with her family back in the UK, sharing with them daily snapshots of her life and the Japanese culture. She was evidently very happy and content with her new life there. However, Lindsay's happiness was tragically short-lived. On the morning of 25th of March 2007, Lindsay said goodbye to her roommates and left the house with her teaching materials and bag, but she never returned. On the afternoon of 26th of March, Lindsay's parents received a distressing call from school staff reporting Lindsay hadn't shown up for work for 2 consecutive days. It turned out her roommates had already contacted the police the previous night when Lindsay failed to return home, but for some unspecified reason, an investigation had not yet been initiated. The news sent the Hawker family into a state of panic. Lindsay's father hastily booked the earliest flight to Tokyo and got in touch with Ryan, Lindsay's boyfriend. Shocked by the news, Ryan was immediately reminded of the story Lindsay had shared with him 6 days earlier, on 20th March 2007. That day, as Lindsay was heading home by train, an unfamiliar man approached her, claiming to be one of her students. However, Lindsay, who remembered her students well, was sure this man was not one of them. Nevertheless, she courteously greeted him and looked away. For some reason, the man made her feel uneasy. She got off the train and cycled home as usual, but upon nearing her house, she accidentally looked back and realized the man was right behind her. The man caught up and explained he was planning to study abroad and wished to improve his English, asking if Lindsay could provide some private tutoring sessions. Despite feeling unnerved, Lindsay tried to stay calm, thinking maybe she was overreacting, and perhaps he was merely a student seeking extra English lessons. By the time they reached Lindsay's apartment, the man claimed he was extremely thirsty and asked if he could come in for a drink of water and discuss the tutoring schedule. Lindsay hesitated, but knowing her roommates were home, she invited him in. After briefly greeting Lindsay's roommates, the man sat down with Lindsay in the living room. She agreed to teach him English at a cafe, considering it a safe public place for their sessions. While conversing, the man sketched a portrait of Lindsay and wrote down his name, phone number, and email address. This man was Tatsuya Ichihashi. Their first English lesson was scheduled for the 25th March 2007 at a cafe near the train station. The previous day, Lindsay had messaged her boyfriend back in the UK, telling him not to worry about the man who had followed her home, describing him merely as an oddball. They were to meet in a cafe, so she reassured him everything would be fine. Tragically, Lindsay was terribly mistaken. After receiving information, the police reviewed the cafe's security footage and easily spotted Lindsay accompanying Ichihashi into the establishment. Lindsay appeared anxious and fidgety, continually touching her hair. The two were observed studying together for about 50 minutes, during which Ichihashi seemed to be rummaging through various bags without finding what he was looking for. Around 10 a.m., they left and jointly hailed a taxi. By this time, the police had determined that Ichihashi was the last person seen with Lindsay. At 8 p.m. on March 26th, 9 officers arrived at Ichihashi's apartment. Splitting into 2 groups, one remained on the ground floor, while the other ascended to his 4th floor unit. However, upon opening the door, Ichihashi, to the police's astonishment, bolted from his apartment and slipped through their cordon. Barefoot and carrying a backpack, he sped down the emergency exit, eluding the officers. His swift escape meant that those on the fourth floor couldn't alert their colleagues below in time, allowing him to once again evade the waiting police by sprinting through the winding streets. Upon examining Ichihashi's apartment, the scene was chaotic, with women's belongings scattered throughout. A purse belonging to Lindsay was discovered in a corner, but that was not the worst of it. Stepping onto the balcony, the police uncovered a horrific sight. Ichihashi had moved a bathtub outside, filled with soil and sand, from which a small, pale hand protruded. It was Lindsay Hawker's corpse. Her naked body was removed from the bathtub, her mouth gagged with a scarf, and her limbs tightly bound with garden twine. Severe bruises covered her body, evidence of a prolonged, savage attack. A large egg-sized bruise on her left cheek indicated repeated punches to the face, while other injuries suggested she had been kicked and fallen against furniture. Lindsay had been strangled to such an extent that her neck cartilage was crushed, her head was shaved, and her hair was found in a plastic bag. At 3 a.m. on March 27th, Lindsay's parents received the most dreadful news imaginable. Their daughter's body had been found. The police then looked into Ichishi's background. A 28-year-old living alone in a 3-bedroom apartment in Uchiba. On the outskirts of Tokyo, his affluent parents, a dentist mother, and a surgeon father had purchased the apartment for him. Despite their success, Ichihashi was a disappointment, never securing a stable job and still dependent on his parents' monthly allowance at 28. He lived in solitude, with a penchant for violent manga, and had previous arrests for stalking and assaulting women. At the time of the incident, Ichihashi had a long-distance girlfriend, meeting her only a few times a month. He was also rumored to have a fitness addiction, regularly attending the gym and jogging, which could explain his ability to pursue Lindsay on her bicycle home on March 20th. After their session on March 25th, Ichihashi pretended to have left his money at home, convincing Lindsay to share a taxi back to his place to retrieve it. Lindsay told the taxi driver to wait a few minutes while she accompanied Ichihashi to get the money. However, she did not return after 7 minutes, prompting the driver to leave. Wanted posters featuring Ichihashi's image flooded Tokyo. The murder news was broadcasted nationwide and internationally, with police urging the public to provide any information, no matter how insignificant, to apprehend the dangerous criminal. The investigation followed leads to red light districts, hostels, and hotels, yet led nowhere. Months passed, and Ichihashi seemed to vanish into thin air. Meanwhile, fan clubs glorifying the twisted murderer emerged online, praising Ichihashi as a hero, an outlaw challenging the police, and even labeling him as Japan's most handsome criminal. Yet, unbeknownst to many, his familiar face was gone, living incognito in Ibaraki, northwest of Tokyo. Ichihashi altered his appearance as his face plastered wanted posters everywhere. He frequently changed residences and disguised himself with glasses, fake hair, and a mask. Yet, knowing this was insufficient, he took a drastic and bizarre step, performing surgery on his own face. Ichihashi purchased a first aid kit and removed a large mole on his left cheek before using scissors to trim and reduce his lower lip. Unable to complete this self-surgery in one go due to the pain, he did not abandon his plan. A few days later, he completed the self-operation in a public bathroom. He also attempted to narrow his nose using needle and thread, but found the procedure more challenging than modifying his lips. Realizing he needed professional help, he planned to undergo a legitimate cosmetic surgery, but this required funds. Using the name, age, and address of a deceased man, he secured a job as a construction laborer in Osaka. Though Ichihashi's co-workers found him odd, they never suspected anything. While police were searching everywhere, Ichihashi worked steadily at the construction company for 13 months, saving approximately 1,000 yen. Eventually, he had enough money for a nose job, aiming for a longer and higher nose. The surgery was successful, yet Ichihashi remained unsatisfied, desiring a complete facial reconstruction. 2 years after the incident, on October 24, 2009, Ichihashi visited a cosmetic clinic in Nagoya for lip surgery and eyelid correction. While completing the paperwork, the clinic staff noticed a large scar on his cheek from where he had removed the mole. Suspicion arose when Ichihashi agreed to have his photo taken for before and after comparisons. The clinic staff recognized him as the national fugitive and immediately contacted the police. However, sensing their suspicion, Ichihashi abruptly quit his job and fled to Okinawa. This time, the police apprehended him at the ferry terminal. Realizing there was no escape, Ichihashi surrendered to the authorities. Ichihashi quickly confessed, revealing he had first seen Lindsay on the train and had secretly followed her for months before deciding to approach her on March 20th. After deceiving Lindsay to visit his apartment to retrieve tuition fees, he dragged her inside and raped her. Despite Lindsay's fierce resistance, she could not escape a tragic and painful fate. On July 11, 2011, Ichihashi was sentenced to life imprisonment. During his incarceration, he authored a book titled Until I Was Arrested, which recounted the 2 years he spent avoiding capture and the drastic measures he took to change his appearance. The book sold over 100,000 copies, and Ichihashi offered to donate the proceeds to Lindsay's family, but they declined. The Hawker family expressed their gratitude for the case's resolution and the justice served, but mourned Lindsay's permanent loss. After such profound pain, all that remained was a hope for Lindsay's soul to find peace.
In the scorching August of 1985, St. Petersburg, Florida was grappling not only with the typical heat wave, but also with the surge of consumer culture, highlighted by the vibrant activity at the Tyrone Square Mall. Amidst this scene, Shelley Towers, aged 45, became a local sensation as an afternoon host on the Home Shopping Network, a venture reshaping retail and entertainment. Shelley's on-screen persona, a mix of warmth and enthusiasm, captivated viewers interested in the latest cubic zirconia jewelry or Ronco kitchen gadgets. Off-air, Shelley was a cornerstone of the St. Petersburg Community Theater, applying her University of Florida performing arts education to dynamic local productions. She had recently been spotted at the Mahaffey Theater, celebrating the success of a summer musical. Shelley's family ties were deeply rooted in the area. Her sister, Linda Towers, was a well-known figure in the community, often volunteering at the All Children's Hospital, while their parents, George and Margaret Towers, had been fixtures at the local VFW hall before their passing. Described by friends as effervescent and driven, Shelley was not content to rest on her laurels. She had dreams of directing with aspirations to bring Broadway-caliber productions to the Gulf Coast. Her recent diary entries uncovered by investigators revealed plans for a theatrical adaptation of popular works like The Color Purple, which had just made a splash in the literary world. In the days leading to her tragic end, Shelley was in the midst of rehearsals for a play she hoped would mark her directorial debut. She was also preparing for the fall television season, with the Home Shopping Network poised to capitalize on the upcoming holiday frenzy. Her life, it seemed, was a whirlwind of potential cut short by an act as senseless as it was savage. On the morning of August 23, 1985, the city of St. Petersburg awoke to a stifling humidity that clung to the streets like a heavy blanket. At approximately 7:45 a.m., as residents prepared for their day, with radios tuned to the latest news on President Reagan's tax reform proposals and Madonna's Like a Virgin tour dates, a grim discovery was made in the quiet neighborhood of Crescent Lake. Shelley Towers, known to many through her cheerful presence on the Home Shopping Network, was found lifeless in her craftsman-style bungalow, a home that once resonated with lines from Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, now silent and steeped in tragedy. Her neighbor, Alice Bendinelli, an 89-year-old retiree who had spent her career as a steady-handed nurse at St. Anthony's Hospital, had ventured next door after noticing an uncharacteristic stillness in Shelley's usually bustling abode. Alice, upon entering, was met with a scene that starkly contrasted the vibrant life Shelley led. The body was in the living room, among scattered issues of TV Guide and Vogue, with the television still displaying the morning's broadcast of the Home Shopping Network. The disarray spoke of a struggle, a stark departure from the neatness Shelley maintained. her penchant for order evident from the alphabetized collection of VHS tapes ranging from The Breakfast Club to Gone with the Wind. The discovery sent shock waves through the community as Alice, with a practiced calmness that belied her in her turmoil, dialed 911. The operator, trained for emergencies yet unaccustomed to calls of such grave nature, dispatched officers to the scene, initiating an investigation that would peel back the layers of a seemingly peaceful neighborhood to reveal a dark underbelly of envy and violence. The St. Petersburg Police Department received the dispatch call at 7:48 a.m., a time when the city was just beginning to stir under the weight of the summer heat. The streets were bustling with commuters, many of whom were tuned into the local radio station, where talk of the Chicago Bears' upcoming NFL season under Coach Dykes' leadership filled the airwaves. It was against this ordinary backdrop that detectives Michael Russo and Laurette Cheney arrived at the scene of an extraordinary crime. Detective Russo, a man whose career in law enforcement had weathered the storms of Florida's most tumultuous cases, in Detective Cheney, known for her keen analytical mind and her recent feature in the St. Petersburg Times for her work in forensic science, approached the bungalow on 5th Street North with a sense of urgency. The neighborhood, with its well-manicured lawns and Spanish moss-draped oak trees, was an unlikely stage for such a brutal act. The interior of the home was a stark contrast to the sunny exterior. The living room, typically a haven for Shelley script readings and rehearsals, was now a chaotic crime scene. Bloodstains marred the floral patterned wallpaper, and the air was heavy with the accurate scent of violence. The victim, Shelley Towers, lay among the remnants of her life's passions: a blood-spattered copy of the Wall Street Journal, a brochure for the local Salvador Dali Museum, and a promotional home shopping network mug filled with cold coffee. Detectives Russo and Cheney moved methodically, documenting the scene with Polaroid photographs, a standard practice before the advent of digital technology. They collected fingerprints, canvassed for witness statements, and conferred with the responding officers. The murder weapon, a common steak knife from a set advertised in a recent Sears catalog, was found at the scene, suggesting a lack of premeditation or a killer confident enough to use what was immediately available. As the crime scene unit dusted for prints and bagged evidence, the detectives knew that the investigation would be a race against time, with the oppressive Florida heat threatening to compromise crucial forensic clues. The pressure was on to solve the murder of Shelley Towers, a woman whose life had been as vibrant as the community she had served. As the St. Petersburg community reeled from the news of Shelley Towers' death, the investigation turned to Jonathan Stanley, age 34. A fixture in the local theater scene, Stanley was an ambitious director whose dreams of elevating the St. Petersburg Community Theater to new heights were well known. His professional rivalry with Shelley was no secret, especially after their recent contentious battle over the direction of Neil Simon's Biloxi Blues, which had just completed a successful run at the theater. Stan Lee, with his sharp features and intense gaze, was last seen storming out of Shelley's apartment on the night of August 22nd, following what neighbors described as a thunderous argument that pierced the stillness of the evening. The dispute, it seemed, was over creative differences regarding the theater's upcoming season, with Shelley advocating for the inclusion of female playwrights like Wendy Wasserstein, whose The Heidi Chronicles was making waves in the theatrical world. During the interrogation at the police headquarters, a nondescript building that stood in contrast to the grandeur of the nearby Vinoy Park Hotel, Stanley's demeanor oscillated between defiance and exasperation. He vehemently denied any involvement in Shelley's murder, his alibi supported by a time-stamped receipt from a late-night visit to a local 711, where he claimed to have gone to clear his head after the argument. Despite his alibi, investigators were skeptical. The intensity of the argument, witnessed by several, and Stanley's known temper led them to probe deeper. They scrutinized Stanley's past, uncovering a trail of heated exchanges with Shelley that often played out in the pages of the St. Petersburg Times theater reviews, where critics praised Shelley's performances while often critiquing Stanley's directorial choices. As the interrogation continued, Stanley maintained his composure, but his hands, which had so often directed actors on stage, now betrayed a slight tremor, an indication perhaps of the pressure he felt as the spotlight of suspicion shone brightly upon him. The investigation's focus shifted to Charlene Cookie Christensen, 26, a local exotic dancer with aspirations that stretched beyond the neon glow of the clubs where she performed. Christensen, known for her fiery hair and equally fiery temperament, had a history of minor run-ins with the law, often featured in the blotter of the St. Petersburg Times. Her dream was to leave the world of late-night entertainment, like the famed Mons Venus Club in Tampa, and pursue a career in cosmetology inspired by the burgeoning beauty icons of the 80s, such as Vidal Sassoon and Paul Mosen. On the night of Shelley Towers' murder, Christensen was seen in the vicinity of the victim's home. Her presence noted by a convenience store clerk who recalled her buying a pack of Virginia Slims, a brand she favored and one that was aggressively targeting the women's market with the slogan, "You've come a long way, baby." The sighting placed her near the crime scene around the time the murder was estimated to have occurred. When brought in for questioning, Christensen's demeanor was an intriguing blend of nonchalance and guardedness. She sat across from the investigators in the sterile interrogation room, her hands folded neatly, a stark contrast to the colorful tattoos that adorned her arms, reminders of past impulsiveness she was striving to move beyond. Her alibi was a flimsy one. She claimed to have been walking home after a shift at the club, her route taking her past Shelley Towers' house purely by coincidence. The detectives pressed her, questioning her about a series of disorderly conduct arrests that suggested a capacity for violence. Christensen remained calm, her voice steady as she insisted that her past was not a prologue to murder. Despite her composed exterior, the detectives noted the occasional flicker of anxiety in her eyes, a possible sign of deceit. As the interrogation drew to a close, Christensen's future hung in the balance, her dreams clashing with the stark reality of being a suspect in a high-profile murder case. On the hot morning of August 30th, 1985, as St. Petersburg residents perused the St. Petersburg Times for updates on the local mayoral race, a significant break occurred in the Towers case. At approximately 10:15 a.m., under the relentless Florida sun, a sanitation worker emptying dumpsters behind the commercial strip on 4th Street North discovered a blood-stained glove among the refuse of a busy Burger King. The glove, a common latex variety often used in household chores and advertised in the latest JCPenney catalog, seemed incongruous amid fast food wrappers and discarded new Coke cans. A failed rebranding attempt by Coca-Cola that summer. The sanitation worker, aware of the ongoing investigation from the buzz on the local news, immediately informed the authorities. Detectives Russo and Cheney arrived shortly after, the urgency palpable as they secured the area. The glove was carefully collected and sent to the forensics lab for analysis, where technicians would perform DNA testing, a burgeoning field of science that was beginning to revolutionize criminal investigations. The discovery of the glove prompted a flurry of activity at the police department. The evidence potentially linking the killer to the crime scene was a tangible piece of the puzzle that had, until then, eluded the investigators. The results would take time, but the detectives understood the gravity of the find. It could very well be the key to unlocking the mystery of who had brutally ended Shelley Towers' life. As the day wore on, the heat did little to dampen the resolve of the St. Petersburg police. If the glove matched the blood type found at the crime scene, it would narrow down the list of suspects and bring them one step closer to justice for Shelley. The community, still reeling from the loss, watched and waited, hoping for closure to a case that had shaken the city to its core. As the Florida sun cast long shadows over St. Petersburg, the investigation took a turn towards Robert J. Stanhope, a 67-year-old retiree from Centerville, Ohio. Stanhope's life was a stark contrast to the vibrant art scene that Shelley Towers had inhabited. A former employee in the tractor business, his days were now filled with leisurely rounds of golf at the local course and the occasional fishing trip off the Gulf Pier, a tranquil routine disrupted by the murder investigation. Stanhope's connection to Shelley was not just through shared history. He was intricately linked to the present drama as the ex-husband of the victim and the current romantic partner of the first suspect, Jonathan Stanley. His personality, often described as affable and laid-back, seemed at odds with the crime's violent nature. Yet, investigators speculated that beneath the genial exterior could lie motives of jealousy or financial gain, perhaps tied to Shelley's rising success or Jonathan's ambitions. During the interrogation, Stanhope maintained a composed demeanor, his responses measured, intinged with a sadness that seemed genuine. He recounted his movements with a precision that suggested a man more accustomed to the orderly world of machinery than the chaotic realm of crime. He spoke of his dreams now soured by the specter of suspicion of a peaceful retirement filled with simple pleasures and free from the complications of his past. Stanhope's alibi for the night of the murder was scrutinized against the backdrop of 1985 St. Petersburg, where the local news was abuzz with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers preseason games and the opening of the new Salvador Dali Museum. His claims of attending a quiet dinner at the Pier restaurant, a popular spot for locals and tourists alike, followed by a solitary evening listening to the latest Dire Straits album, Brothers in Arms, on his high-fidelity stereo system, were carefully checked against receipts and witness statements. As the detectives pieced together the timeline, they weighed Stanhope's words against the evidence collected, aware that the truth lay somewhere amidst the retiree's recollections and the physical clues left behind. Could this seemingly ordinary retiree hold the key to unraveling the mystery of Shelley Towers' death? In the sweltering August heat of 1985, the St. Petersburg Police Department found themselves sifting through the lives entangled in the tragic demise of Shelley Towers. It was Jonathan Stanley, a 34-year-old theater director with sharp ambitions, who emerged as the perpetrator of this heinous act. Stanley, once a beacon of potential in the local art scene, now stood accused of extinguishing one of its brightest lights. The investigation revealed a man driven not by the pursuit of artistic excellence, but by a voracious hunger for control and recognition. His aspirations had been to transform the St. Petersburg Community Theater into a powerhouse, rivaling the acclaim of Broadway itself. Stanley's vision was grand, but his methods, as the investigation uncovered, were rooted in a darker reality. The evening of the murder, Stanley had attended a performance of a chorus line at the Bayfront Center, an event confirmed by ticket stubs and eyewitness accounts. However, it was after the curtain fell that Stanley's true intentions unfolded. He visited Shelley under the guise of discussing their creative differences, only to engage in a fatal altercation that ended with him stabbing her 27 times with a steak knife, a model recently featured in a Sears catalog as part of a robust kitchenware set. Stanley's motive was as clear as it was chilling. By eliminating Shelley, he aimed to dissolve the one obstacle that stood between him and total dominion over the theater they both cherished. In his mind, her death was a necessary sacrifice on the altar of his ambition. It was a narrative that echoed the era's ruthless corporate ethos, a time when figures like Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street were celebrated for their unyielding pursuit of power. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the police apprehended Stanley without incident. He was found in his apartment surrounded by stacks of plays and directorial notes, a stark contrast to the chaos he had wrought. His reaction to the arrest was one of disbelief. The final curtain had fallen on his freedom, and with it, his dreams. The stifling heat of an August afternoon in 1985 did little to deter the resolve of the St. Petersburg Police Department. On the 2nd of the month, as the local community buzzed about the upcoming premiere of Pee-wee's Big Adventure at the theaters and the latest Space Shuttle Discovery mission, a more terrestrial drama was reaching its climax. The detectives, armed with the conclusive evidence from the blood-stained glove and a damning wiretap recording that captured a confession, descended upon the residence of Jonathan Stanley. The home, once a haven for thespian strategizing and post-rehearsal celebrations, was now the site of a final act that none would applaud: a suspect's arrest for the murder of Shelley Towers. Jonathan Stanley, 34, stood in disbelief as the officers read him his rights. The man who had once commanded the stage with a director's authority now found his script irrevocably altered. His reaction, a mixture of shock and a dawning realization of the consequences of his actions, was a stark contrast to the composed figure the community had known. Meanwhile, Shelley's family, who had been following the case with a mix of hope and heartache, received the news of the arrest. While justice seemed to be on the horizon, it did little to fill the void left by Shelley's absence. Her sister, Linda, who had spent the past weeks in a haze of grief, now faced the reality of a legal battle that would discredit the memory of her beloved sibling. The community too reacted to the news with a collective sense of relief and horror. The local media, including the St. Petersburg Times, were quick to report on the turn of events. Their headlines, a sobering reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. As the sun set on that fateful day, the residents of St. Petersburg grappled with the duality of their city, a place of sunlit beaches and darkened theaters, where dreams could be both made and unmade by the hands of ambition. As the gavel sounded in the courtroom of the Pinellas County Justice Center, the trial of Jonathan Stanley commenced, capturing the attention of a community still grappling with the brutal murder of Shelley Towers. The prosecution, led by Elizabeth Laclay, a 38-year-old assistant state attorney with a reputation for her tenacious courtroom presence, presented a narrative of envy and ambition turned lethal. She painted Stanley as a man whose aspirations for theatrical dominance in St. Petersburg led him to silence his most formidable competitor. Laclay meticulously laid out the timeline of events corroborated by witness testimonies and the damning evidence of the bloody glove found discarded near a local Burger King, an establishment that had recently introduced its Where's Herb advertising campaign to the public. She referenced the cultural zeitgeist of 1985, drawing parallels to the cutthroat competition depicted in the boardrooms of the popular television series Dynasty. In contrast, defense attorney Jack Mosen, 45, known for his composed courtroom demeanor and a persuasive orator, argued that Stanley's passion for the theater was being misconstrued as a motive for murder. He suggested that the evidence was circumstantial, questioning the reliability of DNA testing, a science still in its infancy compared to the fingerprint analysis that had long been the gold standard in forensics. The victim's family, seated in the front row and often clutching each other for support, displayed a range of emotions from quiet tears to visible anger as they listened to the proceedings. They were surrounded by a community that had followed the case closely from the initial reports in the St. Petersburg Times to the courtroom drama that now unfolded before them. As the trial progressed, the prosecution and defense engaged in a legal ballet, each maneuvering for the favor of the jury. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, much like the humidity outside the courthouse where onlookers gathered, awaiting the outcome of a trial that would deliver either justice for Shelley Towers or a continued search for answers. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the jury returned to deliver the verdict in the highly publicized murder trial of Jonathan Stanley. The case had riveted St. Petersburg, a city where the tranquility of its Gulf Coast beaches contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions unleashed by Shelley Towers' tragic death. As the court awaited the jury's decision, the air was thick with anticipation, much like the atmosphere at Tropicana Field during a tie-breaking baseball game. Elizabeth Laclay, the prosecutor, stood resolute. Her case, built on a foundation of forensic evidence and witness testimonies that she had argued, pointed unequivocally to Stanley's guilt. Defense attorney Jack Mosen, equally steadfast, had challenged the prosecution's assertions, suggesting that the field of blood-type evidence was not as infallible as the public, buoyed by the optimism of scientific advancement in the space shuttle program, might believe. The jury, having been sequestered for days, much like the viewers who had eagerly awaited the outcome of the Who Shot JR mystery on Dallas years prior, had reached a unanimous decision. Guilty. The courtroom filled with the victim's family and friends, some of whom wore pins bearing Shelley's image akin to the Live Aid concert memorabilia that symbolized global unity, let out a collective yet subdued sigh of relief. Sentencing was swift, with the judge issuing life without the possibility of parole. The sentence was a reflection of the severity of the crime and the community's desire for justice, a sentiment echoed in editorials in the St. Petersburg Times. Some felt the punishment was just, while others debated the merits of retribution versus rehabilitation, a conversation that mirrored national discussions fueled by the controversial Just Say No campaign against drugs. The verdict had a profound effect on Shelley Towers' friends and family. For them, the sentencing provided a semblance of closure. Though the absence of Shelley's vibrant presence remained a void no judgment could fill. The community, having been a collective witness to the unfolding drama, hoped to find peace and return to a sense of normalcy. Much like the rest of the country sought comfort in the familiarity of sitcoms like The Golden Girls. In the aftermath of the trial that had captivated St. Petersburg, the city sought to heal and move forward. The verdant palm-lined streets and bustling marinas slowly returned to their usual pace, the echoes of the case receding into the background like the fading notes of a Dire Straits track on the radio. Detectives Michael Russo and Laurette Cheney, who would become local figures due to their involvement in the high-profile case, continued their work with the St. Petersburg Police Department. They carried with them the experience of the tower's investigation, using it to inform their approach to future cases. The trial had been a testament to the evolving field of forensic science, a narrative that would eventually become a part of law enforcement training programs across the country. For the suspects who had been caught in the web of suspicion, life took divergent paths. Charlene Cookie Christensen, cleared of any wrongdoing, pursued her dream of starting anew. She enrolled in a cosmetology program, her ambitions reflecting a national trend towards self-improvement and personal empowerment, akin to the fitness craze symbolized by Jane Fonda's workout videos. Robert J. Stanhope, the retiree once entangled in the case, returned to his quiet life, finding comfort in the routines of his community. His story highlighted the personal toll of a brush with the criminal justice system, even for those ultimately uninvolved in the crime. Shelley Tower's family and friends sought solace in preserving her legacy. They created a scholarship in her name at the University of Florida, ensuring her passion for the arts would inspire future generations. The local theater where Shelley had once performed dedicated its stage to her memory, a poignant tribute in a city celebrated for its vibrant cultural scene. As the years went by, the tower's case became a chapter in St. Petersburg's history, a somber note in the otherwise sunny chronicles of the Sunshine City. Those affected by the tragedy found their own ways to cope and honor Shelley's memory, their resilience a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and find hope in the face of loss.
February 23, 1991. Dan Willoughby, a dedicated father, is heading back to the family's vacation beach house with his kids. The children's faces are lit up with excitement from their recent museum trip, eager to recount their experiences to their mother, Trish. As they enter the home, his 10-year-old daughter dashes ahead of her siblings, eager to tell her mother about their day. But her excitement abruptly halts when she discovers a scene that will haunt her forever. Trish Willoughby, a caring mother, lies unconscious on the bed. The room shows clear signs of a violent struggle. Trish has been brutally attacked, stabbed, bludgeoned, and strangled. A butter knife is embedded in her temple, a chilling testament to the violence she endured. Her head was wrapped with a bloody towel, a sight that would haunt her family forever. The children were in shock, their cries echoing through the once peaceful beach house. Despite her horrific wounds, Trish was still alive, moaning in pain. The happy family vacation had turned into a living nightmare. A doctor nearby hurried to help. There was little aid he could provide to the profusely bleeding woman. In an ambulance, Trish was rushed to the hospital where she unfortunately succumbed to her wounds. Dan grievingly informed the authorities, who are now on the scene, that $400 and Trish's 2 valuable rings were missing from the condo. The crime scene was a mess, with drawers pulled out as if someone was desperately searching for something. The police were ill-equipped and ill-prepared to handle such a case. They took 7 Polaroid pictures and sealed the scene, promising to investigate it later. Police questioned the hotel staff, who told them there was a suspicious character lurking near the beach house that afternoon. They also questioned Dan, who was frantic and sobbing, and said they were a happily married couple on their family vacation. The police had no further questions. In the wake of the heartrending incident, a distraught Dan implored the Mexican authorities to permit him to transport Trish's remains back to the States for a dignified funeral. The authorities, concerned about the negative publicity they would receive if news leaked out, especially one of rich foreign tourists meeting brutal ends in Mexico, if consented to have Trish's remains returned with her family to Arizona. Notably, no autopsy was conducted, a procedure that would have been mandatory in a similar situation had an incident like this occurred on American soil. The news of Trish's murder sent shockwaves through their community back in Phoenix, Arizona. Trish was a successful businesswoman running a lucrative herbal supplement company with her mother. She was known as a perfect person, untainted, always appearing happy and never discussing her problems with others. She was loved by everyone, everywhere she went. Trish's body had barely arrived back when local authorities started receiving numerous phone calls. People claiming foul play was involved and not just a horrible coincidence. It appears Dan was a man of contradictions. To his community, He was a straight-laced, church-going, faithful Mormon husband. He was known for his generosity, often helping around the neighborhood and even bringing homeless people home for dinners. But looking a little deeper, a different picture of Dan emerged. As the investigation continued, the police began to uncover more about Dan's double life. His colleagues revealed that Dan was a party animal who loved to drink alcohol, a behavior considered very un-Mormon-like and against his outwardly image. He was often absent from work, spending his time and business expenses meeting clients or, according to his colleagues, on a woman called Yesenia, under the guise that she was a customer. There was even a joke going around the office. Dan would be seen freshening up in the bathroom, come out smelling of strong cologne, and then breeze through the office, stating he was off to see a client. However, everyone knew he was really going away to spend time with Yesenia Pitino. The police now were curious to know who was this mystery woman. Enter Yesenia Pitino, a young and exotic woman who had moved to Arizona with her family at the age of 6. She had a wild life, drifting from bar to bar, man to man. She met Dan in the late 1989 when she was waiting for a bus and he pulled over in his flashy Jaguar. He flirted with her, jokingly scolding her for littering, as she dropped a candy wrapper on the ground. He offered her a lift and handed her his business card, playfully suggesting a holiday trip and drinks. It seemed Yesenia had found the type of man she was always looking for. A man eager to spoil her, take her to expensive places, and lavish her with attention. Dan had persuaded his wife that he required Spanish lessons to better navigate his business prospects in Mexico, of course. Subsequently, he even presented Yesenia to his wife and children as his Spanish tutor. Soon after, he also started taking frequent trips to Mexico, bringing Yesenia along. Yesenia was described as strikingly beautiful with a fiercely passionate personality. Perhaps it was this passion that fueled their relationship. Dan even kept a photo of Yesenia displayed in his office with the words, "To my future husband, Dan Willoughby," written on it. It is unknown if at the time his wife suspected anything about the nature of their relationship or if her strong sense of morality and faith prevented her from viewing her husband unfavorably. For those acquainted with him, Dan's relationship with Yesenia was hardly a well-guarded secret. He was quick to brag about his attractive new Spanish tutor, even boasting that she was, quote, "amazing in bed." In a mere span of weeks, Yesenia's world underwent a dramatic change. Dan arranged an apartment for her in close proximity to his residence. He persuaded Trish that it's their moral duty to cover her rent. But, as the saying goes, what happens in the dark comes to light. Dan's lavish lifestyle and absences from work eventually caught up with him, and he was fired from his job. Dan Willoughby, once a respected figure in his community, was now solely reliant on Trish's income. Despite losing his job, Dan continued to live a life of luxury, all while maintaining Yesenia as his Spanish teacher. His frequent absences and lavish lifestyle, funded by Trish's income, began to sow seeds of resentment within the family. The once happy home was now filled with tension and uncertainty. Trish, who had been supporting the family single-handedly, was growing increasingly worried about Dan's unexplained absences. Her concerns were shared by her mother, who began to suspect that something was very wrong. Dan frequently dropped off the kids at school and spent the rest of the day at Yesenia's apartment, undoubtedly practicing more than just Spanish. Trish grew increasingly uncomfortable as she could not reach Dan throughout the day, despite the fact he was no longer working. She spoke to her mother, who advised her to speak to Dan. In the fall of 1990, Trish's suspicions reached a boiling point. She decided to confront the situation head-on and went looking for Dan at Yesenia's apartment. What she discovered there changed everything. The front door was unlocked. She walked straight in and found Dan in Yesenia's bedroom, hastily putting on his shirt. Yesenia, hearing Trish's voice entering the apartment, immediately hid. The confrontation was inevitable, and Dan knew it. After a short argument, Trish, still in shock, stormed out with Dan trying to catch up. Dan spoke to Yesenia, asking her to deny everything if Trish speaks to her and to insist that she is just his Spanish teacher. The next day, Trish confronted Yesenia at the public pool area of the apartment complex. The conversation escalated and voices were raised, but Yesenia denied any romantic involvement with Dan. She even offered to stop tutoring Dan if it was causing problems in their marriage. But the truth was far from this. Yesenia and Dan continued to see each other, lying to Trish about their relationship. Fast forward to March 1st, 1991, the investigators brought Dan in for questioning. During their interrogation, the detectives delicately broached the subject of the large fortune that Dan would inherit from Trish's thriving business and her life insurance policies. A question that, under normal circumstances, might have been met with a simple answer, but not this time. Dan's reaction was anything but ordinary. His face flushed, his demeanor shifted, and he became noticeably rattled. He shot back with a question of his own, his voice laced with a mix of fear and indignation. Am I being considered a suspect here? His sudden defensiveness, his agitation, it was like a siren going off in the investigators' minds. It was a big red flag. Meanwhile, the police are also searching for Yesenia. They visit her apartment but find movers and packers suspecting that she was planning to flee the country. They track her down to a hotel near the airport just before she was scheduled to take a flight. Searching through Yesenia's belongings, they discover a social security card belonging to an Alfredo Pinto, a man charged with prostitution in Oregon. So, who is Alfredo Pinto? Yesenia then revealed she was, or rather is, Mr. Pinto. Yesenia Patino Gonzalez was born male and had even been wedded to a man named Jack, who also funded her gender reassignment surgery after their marriage. This left investigators even more puzzled because there was no same-sex marriage back then, neither in Mexico nor in USA. With the revelation of these intricate details about Dan, Trish, and Yesenia, the investigators found themselves intrigued and eager to delve deeper into the case. During questioning, Yesenia denied being involved in any plot against Trish. She admitted to being in Mexico, partying with friends the weekend Trish was murdered, but claimed she wasn't aware Dan was there. When confronted about Trish's rings that were found in her wallet, she claimed she got them from a man on the beach. Completely unfazed by these accusations, Yesenia appeared calm and was even flirting with the detective. At one point, she leans into him and says, "Detective, I know what a man wants." Due to a lack of evidence against her at the time, the police used an existing shoplifting warrant to put her in jail. When Dan was later questioned about Yesenia's gender at birth, he claimed to be completely unaware of her transgender identity. He claimed she had no visible Adam's apple or a deep voice, and she was all woman. Considering the intimate nature of their relationship, this revelation left the investigators stunned. One of them even stated, quote, "You just can't make this stuff up. The truth is far crazier than fiction." Searching for more evidence, the police exhumed Trish's body to conduct an autopsy. The coroner found a bruise on Trish's abdomen and evidence that she had been struck in the head 9 times. She had also been stabbed in the head with a butter knife, and there was ecchymosis, a type of bruising on her body that was compatible with a wound from a right-handed fist. On March 4, 1991, in a joint effort with Mexican authorities, a team of forensic specialists from the USA was granted access to the beach house where it all originally went down. The team uncovered compelling evidence implicating Yesenia. Her fingerprints were found all over the crime scene, especially on the back door and a soda bottle left there. However, there was no direct forensic evidence discovered against Dan Willoughby. By the time the forensics and autopsy results are released, Yesenia had already been discharged from jail and had fled to Mexico. The police, in cross-country cooperation, searched for her everywhere and with the help of media exposure, finally had a lead. In December 1991, someone had reported having seen Yesenia working at a bar in Mexico and had called Crime Stoppers. She was arrested in a crowded cantina in Mazatlan and agreed to cooperate with the Arizona police. Yesenia was presented with a proposal. If she agreed to be extradited to the USA and testify against Dan in his trial, she would receive a reduced sentence. She accepted this offer. April 1992, the trial of Dan Willoughby unfolded. A chilling plot began to emerge from the shadows. Yesenia, the Spanish teacher-turned-lover, took the stand, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom. She testified that Dan had spoken about killing his wife on multiple occasions, her words painting a horrifying picture of premeditation. Dan had discussed buying a firearm silencer in Mexico, drowning Trish while scuba diving or pushing her off a cliff at the Grand Canyon. The courtroom gasped as Yesenia recounted a dinner at a restaurant in May 1990, where Dan chillingly declared, "I think I will take her to Mexico and get rid of her." He even talked about having his mafia connections kill her. Yesenia disclosed that Dan had held discussions with Trish and her mother about the future of their business in the event of one of their passings. He persuaded them to agree to a buyout arrangement funded by insurance. Trish was covered by multiple insurance policies, including an astounding $750,000 policy acquired just a few months before her untimely demise. Yesenia revealed that 3 months before the incident, Dan started to meticulously devise his dark scheme. He confided in her that he wanted the satisfaction of killing Trish himself and gave Yesenia specific instructions on her role. She was to come in after he leaves, mess up the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, tie a rope around Trish's neck and attack her body with a knife, then take off with some valuables and money. To prepare for his sinister plan, Dan rented a condo in Rocky Point, somewhat removed from others in the area, and paid in cash. He and Yesenia made 2 trips from Phoenix to Rocky Point Beach to explore the area and go over their plans. Dan arranged for Yesenia's brother to take her to the beach on the day of the crime. On the afternoon that their sinister plot was executed, Dan met Yesenia and her brother on the beach. After a short chat about their plans, Dan returned to the condo. Yesenia left her brother in a park and drove to a spot with a view of the condo. After Dan and the children drove off to the museum, it was her cue to enter the condo through the unlocked back door. Taking the knife from the kitchen, Yesenia went to the bedroom and saw Trish lying unconscious on the bed, soaking in her own blood. Trish was still breathing, each breath making a gurgling sound. Following Dan's plan, Yesenia stabbed and strangled Trish but was unable to kill her. After taking Trish's rings and money and scattering the contents of Trish's purse, Yesenia fled, meeting her brother for the return trip to Arizona. Following the tragic event, Dan initiated a series of actions to divert suspicion. He instructed Yesenia to depart Arizona, leading her to return to Mexico. He convened a gathering of his neighbors, where he refuted any involvement in the incident and discouraged them from engaging with the police. Dan also went to great lengths to cover his tracks. He told Yesenia's brother to deceive the police by denying he met him in Mexico. He warned Yesenia's husband, Jack, to stay uninvolved. He contacted his travel agent, asking to erase trip details from the agency's computer system. Dan also asked his former secretary to vouch for his character as a devoted family man, should the police come asking questions. He even instructed her to intimidate a former colleague to prevent them from revealing any information about Yesenia to the police. At the time, Dan had provided false information to investigators, claiming that condo guards had spotted 3 individuals of Native American descent in a black pickup truck in the vicinity. It was revealed that Dan was able to claim an older life insurance policy for his wife, but couldn't collect on the policy purchased for the larger buyout agreement between Trish and her mother. Investigators also uncovered a shocking detail on the day of the incident. Statements from his own children revealed that just after leaving the condo, Dan asked them to wait in the car, claiming he had forgotten his passport and would be back in 5 minutes. He stayed in the condo for about 15 minutes, during which his oldest daughter, who wanted to know what was taking their father so long, tried to enter but could not because the front door was locked. It's speculated that this is the time Dan carried out his attack on Trish, and it lined up with Yesenia's testimony. He was next seen by the kids exiting the front door, tucking in a new shirt. During the investigation, the Mexican government cooperated with Arizona officials by allowing them to interview Yesenia and also giving temporary custody of her so she could testify at Dan's trial. In return for her cooperation, Arizona State agreed not to prosecute Yesenia and to try to have her sentence in Mexico reduced. However, when Yesenia was charged by the Mexican authorities and she pleaded guilty, she received the maximum sentence possible, life in prison. Back in Arizona, the grand jury indicted Dan for premeditated first-degree murder and several other offenses, such as armed robbery, obstructing a criminal investigation, filing a fraudulent insurance claim, etc. Considering everything presented at the trial and jury's indictment on all counts, the judge handed down the maximum sentence. Dan was sentenced to death. However, 3 years after the initial trial, in September 1995, Yesenia wrote a letter to the American judge claiming that she alone was responsible for Trish's demise and that Dan was innocent. Reviewing the forensics of the case, the blood forensics told a different story. 2 distinct types of blood splatters were discovered on the crime scene sheets, indicating that the victim was attacked twice within approximately 10 minutes. This finding supports Yesenia's initial confession, revealing that she did not act alone and entered the condo after Dan had already attacked Trish. In November 1999, Dan's conviction was overturned, and the death penalty was removed from consideration. During the second trial, he received 2 consecutive life sentences. Dan continues to assert his innocence. The case of Dan Willoughby serves as a chilling reminder of how deep human beings can sink when driven by greed and jealousy. Dan had everything: a loving family, a successful career, financial prosperity, and a promising future. Yet, he abandoned it all in pursuit of dark temptations, causing immense suffering to the one he vowed to love and protect. Trish's final moments were marked by severe suffering inflicted by those she had generously cared for. Despite her kindness and support, she was betrayed by those she loved. This harsh reality highlights the profound nature of human betrayal. However, in remembering Trish, we must honor her strength, resilience, and unwavering faith. May she rest in peace. Sandy Melgar, now 59, was discovered 2 days before Christmas 2012, bound inside a closet in her Houston area home, with a chair wedged against the door. Her husband, Jim Melgar, 52, was found in a different closet, dead from blunt force trauma and numerous stab wounds inflicted by a kitchen knife. Authorities believe they have apprehended Jim Melgar's killer, but Sandy Melgar, along with her family and supporters, argue that she was wrongfully convicted and that the true perpetrator remains at large. "I know she didn't do this," says the couple's daughter, Elizabeth Liz Melgar Rose. "I will keep fighting until we can prove that." Jim Melgar was born in Guatemala but immigrated to the U.S. when he was 3 years old. His family settled in Houston, where Sandy Melgar, then Sandy McCulloch, lived. The two ended up becoming high school sweethearts. A few years after high school, the couple got married and started careers. Jim Melgar became an IT specialist and Sandy a nurse. The two had a daughter, Liz, now 32. They also joined Jehovah's Witnesses, an austere Christian sect that demands adherence to strict rules of behavior. "We were a very close-knit family," Liz Melgar Rose said. But Sandy Melgar suffered from a few medical conditions. She had lupus, epilepsy, and hypothyroidism, and she had also had hip replacements. Rose said she saw her mother have violent seizures multiple times. "She had epilepsy that began before I was born, and the lupus didn't come until I was about 3, Rose said. "I remember that because she had to seek treatment for about 6 weeks. She had gone paralyzed on one side of her body. She was in a wheelchair. She was having a really hard time." Stephanie Davies, a family friend of the Melgars, said she noticed Jim Melgar was spending more and more time as his wife's caretaker. Jim was very involved with all aspects, researching her condition, trying to find any kind of possible treatments, cures, whatever he could do, Davies said. There were times that she didn't feel safe driving. She was afraid that her seizures might come on, so she depended on him for a lot of day-to-day activities. On Deck 22, 2012, Sandy and Jim Melgar wanted to celebrate their wedding anniversary. Rose said her mother told her they were going out to dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant, and then she said Sandra told her. They stopped by a local CVS just to grab some drink mixers on their way back home. They got home. They started getting drinks ready. They got into the jacuzzi in their bathroom, spent a few hours in there. Rose said her mother told her that the family's 4 dogs then suddenly started barking in the backyard. So her father went to investigate while her mother stayed and soaked in the jacuzzi. "I think he took a few minutes, so she decided to get out of the jacuzzi," Rose said. She went to her closet, sat on her chair that she has in her closet, and started putting lotion on. The Melgars had planned a family get-together for the following day, day 23, 2012. Jim Melgar's brother, Herman Melgar, and his family arrived at the house at 4:30 p.m. Herman Melgar said they knocked on the door but no one answered. He noticed one of the garage doors was open, so he said. He went through the garage, entered the house, and unlocked the front door for the others. They called out for Sandy and Jim Melgar, but still no one answered. I was telling my dad. I remember clearly telling him, "This doesn't feel right," said Herman Melgar's daughter, Marissa Campos. Herman Melgar said he then heard Sandy Melgar calling for help. He raced to the master bathroom and said he found a chair blocking the bathroom walk and closet door and moved it. When he opened the door, he said, he saw Sandy Melgar lying there with her arms and legs tied up. He struggled to untie Sandy Melgar and she told him to grab a pair of scissors to cut her loose. Jim Melgar was then found nude, beaten, and stabbed to death in a closet in the master bedroom about 30 feet away from the closet where Sandy was found. His legs were tied with a telephone cord and a rope was tied loosely around his chest. In total, authorities said Jim Melgar had more than 50 stab, cutting, and blunt force wounds and injuries. He's got a lot of defensive wounds on both hands, which means he was trying to either disarm the attacker or block the assault, said Celestina Rossi, a blood pattern and crime reconstruction expert who testified for the prosecution. Rossi said, in her opinion, that Jim Melgar and his assailant were locked in hand-to-hand combat in the bedroom closet and that he was killed there. Aside from the 31 cuts and stabs, Jim was badly beaten in the face and head, causing serious damage to his skull, brain, and facial bones, she said. Authorities noted that drawers had been pulled open, jewelry boxes had been riffled through, and a wallet and a purse had been overturned on the bed. Police found a white blouse and a kitchen knife in the jacuzzi tub near the master bathroom where Sandy Melgar was found. But police also found a loaded gun hidden from view in the bedroom closet where Jim Melgar was found and a locked safe. Sandy Melgar, the only surviving witness of the attack, had trouble recalling what had happened. During her police interview, Sandy Melgar told detectives that she and Jim had gone to dinner at the Mexican restaurant and stopped at a CVS to buy drink mixers. She said she remembered a mysterious car trailing them after they left the CVS parking lot, but that it had turned a different direction at some point. After arriving home, she said, she and Jim undressed and got into the jacuzzi. Sometime around midnight, she said, her husband heard the dogs barking and went to go let them into the house. He just was taking a while, so I got out and was going to get dressed or change in my closet. I went in there and I started to change, and that's all I remember until I woke up, Sandy Melgar told the detectives. She said she never heard or saw her husband being attacked. She told police that she had blacked out after either hitting her head or being struck and may have had an epileptic seizure. I couldn't move because I had had a seizure, and so I usually can't move anyway. I hurt all over and my head hurts, she said. But it appeared that police were suspicious of her story. Detectives indicated they just couldn't understand how she could have been unaware of her husband's being murdered in the next room. I know how it looks. I was also tied up, she said in the police interview. Sandy Melgar's family said that in quick succession, she went from being a wife to becoming a widow, and then a suspect in the brutal murder of her husband, Campos Herman. Melgar's daughter said she got the feeling detectives were already looking at her aunt the night the crime was discovered. She said her family doesn't believe that after 32 years of an apparently happy marriage, she would suddenly stab her husband to death. Max Eckrist, Sandy Melgar's defense attorney, said, this idea that something must have happened and then she went crazy and subjected him to over 50 blunt force and sharp force injuries is just impossible. Liz Melgar Rose said the thought that her mother could have murdered her father had crossed her mind. I tried to look at the evidence. I tried to be unbiased about it, which is difficult because these are my parents. In the end, I still want justice for my dad. I want to know who did this, and it was not my mother, Rose said. Sandy Melgar wasn't arrested at that time. A year and a half went by and she moved on with her life. But then, in the summer of 2014, Rose learned that her mother had been indicted in her father's murder. I found out there was a warrant out for her arrest, Rose said. We called the lawyer and we had her turn herself in. It took an additional 3 years, but the case finally went to trial in 2017. In court, prosecutor Colleen Barnett argued a possible motive was that Sandy Melgar wanted a divorce, but feared being shunned by her fellow Jehovah's Witnesses. But Sandy's attorneys presented the picture of a happily married couple in court. Barnett told the jury that Sandy Melgar had lured Jim Melgar into letting her tie up his legs with telephone cord, perhaps as some sort of sex game, and then taken him by surprise using a large kitchen knife to stab him to death. As for the appearance of a home invasion, Barnett argued that it was staged, pointing to crime scene photos of drawers that were neatly arranged, not dumped. She argued that there was no sign of forced entry. And while Barnett claims that nothing was taken from the home, Melgar's defense attorneys disagree, saying there were a number of items of value that were removed. Officers had already recorded a demonstration of how Sandy Melgar could have used a small rug or pillow sham to slide the chair into place under the doorknob, locking herself into the closet. Barnett showed the jury how Sandy could have tied her own hands behind her back. Barnett also researched Sandy's medical records, telling the jury that Sandy had not reported any seizures to her primary care physician for several years prior to her husband's murder, and it was only well after he died that she recalled having a seizure that year. However, for the defense, there was a question of Jim Melgar's blood. Sandy Melgar's attorneys argued that her hands were clean and that there was no sign anyone had cleaned up in the house. There were also no injuries on her hands, and none of her nails was even chipped or broken. Male and female DNA that investigators found around the house on dresser drawer pulls, door handles, and bathroom door handles did not match anyone in the Melgar family. The defense says it came from unknown strangers. The jury deliberated over the case for about 8 hours over 2 days. We all talked about how this case was the last thing you thought about when you went to bed at night and first thing you thought about when you woke up in the morning, jury foreman Tom Bush said. That's the gravity that we weighed this case with. At first, Bush says the jury was split down the middle. On the second day, however, it reached a verdict. Sandy Melgar was found guilty of murder. You know, I felt like everything just got really quiet, Liz Melgar Rose said. The room was just kind of spinning. Yeah. I still feel sick to my stomach when I think about it or hear other people talk about it. I remember clearly just looking at the jurors, just staring at them, every single one of them, because I wanted to remember their faces, and I wanted them to look at us and see the pain that they were causing, Campos said. At her sentencing, Sandy Melgar was given 27 years in state prison. She is appealing her conviction. One of her family members contacted Bob Ruff, a former fire chief and now host of a criminal investigation podcast called Truth and Justice, to plead for help. You're innocent until proven guilty. I saw that the prosecution's case didn't have any meat to it. There were no bones behind why they convicted her, Ruff said. Can I see a scenario where this happened? Can I make this make sense? That Sandra Melgar killed her husband. In this case, I couldn't see it, so we jumped in. Ruff believes in the power of crowdsourcing, using the sleuthing powers of what he says are 100,000 podcast listeners to re-examine the case. The podcast host says assailants could have entered the house when Jim Melgar opened the back door to let the dogs in from the backyard, or they may have already been inside the house when Jim went to get the dogs. Sandy has said she did not know if the back door had been left unlocked, as she had not used it that day. The offenders could have entered through the door, causing the dogs to bark, Ruff said on Truth and Justice. Jim emerged from the master suite to check on the dogs. Jim locks the door behind him and turns around to see the offenders, confronting him with some kind of weapon. Liz Melger Rose is hopeful that Ruff's innovative method of involving his podcast audience in crowdsourcing investigations will help secure her mother's release from prison. Ruff mentioned that one of his listeners examined a crime scene photo of a white blouse found in the tub and identified from the tag that the designer had made that particular shirt exclusively for Costco. This detail is significant because Costco requires a membership card for any purchase, Ruff noted. Despite her continued claims of innocence and the backing of her family and friends, Sandy Melger's conviction has been upheld, including by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. The death of Lauren Ashley Nicole, also known as Laura Hugelmeyer Phelps, occurred after she was allegedly fatally stabbed by her husband while she was asleep. In a lawsuit that her husband dismissed, he claimed that the cough medicine he was taking caused him to unintentionally stab his 28-year-old wife multiple times. After discovering he was covered in his wife's blood upon waking, Phelps called 911 and reported to ABC 13 that he might have accidentally stabbed her while in a drug-induced sleep. "I think I stabbed my wife," Phelps told the cameraman, according to the publication. "What do you mean by that?" "What happened?" the dispatcher asked. "I had a dream, and then I turned on the light, and she was lying lifeless on the floor. I'm covered in blood, and there's a bloody knife on the bed. I think I did it. I can't believe it," Phelps told the dispatcher. Raleigh police charged Phelps with murder on Friday, shortly after he called emergency services. The man's wife was found lifeless with multiple stab wounds. "I had a dream, and then I turned on the light and she was lying lifeless on the floor," Phelps can be heard saying on the phone. "How? How?" the dispatcher asked. Matthew Phelps called 911. "She didn't deserve to die." During the 7-minute conversation, a sobbing Phelps continued to say that his wife did not deserve what happened. "She's not moving at all. Oh my God. She didn't deserve it," Phelps said. The man added, "I took more medicine than I should have. I often can't sleep at night." He told dispatchers that he had taken the cough medicine, Coricetin, because he had trouble sleeping. It should be noted that Phelps and his wife, Lauren Phelps, whose maiden name was Hugelmeyer, have been married since last year. Lauren Hugelmeyer, an active parishioner of her church where she taught Sunday school, was known for her love of children. Lauren's husband studied to be a pastor. According to their wedding page, the couple went to high school together and reunited years later thanks to Instagram. They started dating around 2014 and got married in November 2016. Phelps' Facebook page stated that her husband worked for a landscaping company and studied missions and evangelism at Clear Creek Bible College in Pineville. In Friday's victim impact statements, Lauren Phelps' family members separately described how her passing had a huge ripple effect on their lives. The family was surrounded by fans wearing blue t-shirts with the words, "Lawrence Light." Since September 1st, 2017, I have struggled every day to understand and cope with the murder of my child. There are times when I feel like I won't survive this. Matthew James Phelps Ayers. Actions have changed me forever, Lauren Phelps' mother, Lori Hugelmeyer, said through tears in a packed courtroom. "It broke me in my heart." Lauren Phelps' older sister, Beth Agner, said the family welcomed Matthew Phelps into their home because of how happy he made Lauren Phelps at first. He seemed to love Lauren, despite any flaws she might have, and would do anything to make her happy. What we didn't know was that he was playing a game. "A very deadly game," Agner said. "He lured us all into a trap, taking advantage of our kindness and generosity. We never once thought Lauren was in danger." In the search warrant documents, investigators said they learned from social media accounts that suspect Matthew Phelps may have been fascinated by the serial killer character from the movie American Psycho and imitated him. According to the search warrant documents, investigators said that surveys helped them find Matthew Phelps' Instagram account with the username Marty Radio. According to detectives, the account showed numerous scenes from American Psycho, the 2000 film in which Christian Bale starred as the executive director turned murderer, Patrick Bateman. Investigators said the account also had images of Matthew Phelps dressed as Patrick Bateman. The film is about a serial killer, and Phelps expressed to a friend an interest in what it would be like to kill someone, the documents say. In other search warrant documents, investigators said relatives claimed the couple had problems and that Lauren Phelps was preparing to end the relationship. Bayer, the manufacturer of quercetin, said in a statement at the time that there is no evidence that quercetin is associated with aggressive behavior. An autopsy later revealed that Lauren Ashley Nicole Phelps suffered 123 cuts and stab wounds in the attack on the couple's two-bedroom townhouse in Raleigh. Phelps initially pleaded not guilty. However, Phelps answered yes on Friday when Judge Paul Ridgway asked if he would admit murder in Wake County Court. His statement of first-degree murder implies premeditation, refuting the possibility that the murder was committed under the influence of alcohol caused by cold medicine. As part of the plea agreement, Phelps will spend the rest of his life in prison and will not be eligible for parole. In court on Friday, Phelps apologized for his actions and pointed to drunkenness, drugs, and carelessness. "It was a senseless act, and I regret every step that led me in that direction," Phelps said. "I feel like a monster, one of the unfortunate ones. A part of the darkness that we don't talk about," he added. "This darkness consumed me until I was blinded by the chosen path and was drowned out by my own cry for help." The murder case of Lauren Hugelmeyer Phelps has attracted public attention not only because of its brutality, but also because of several mysterious and unusual circumstances. Cough medicine-based defense. Matthew Phelps claimed to have taken too much cough syrup before committing the crime, which he said led to loss of memory and self-control. This argument has caused a public outcry and debate about the possibility of such a side effect of the drug. 123 injuries. Lauren Phelps was found with 123 wounds from sharp objects including blows to the head, neck, torso, and arms. This number and severity of injuries indicated an extremely aggressive attack. Problems in marriage. Despite the fact that Matthew studied theology with the aim of becoming a pastor, their marriage was full of problems. It was known that Lauren wanted a divorce, which adds a motive for premeditated murder instead of a crime motivated by a sudden loss of self-control. Recording of the 911 call, Matthew Phelps called 911 saying he woke up and found his wife lifeless, not remembering what happened. His calmness and the details described during the call raised questions about his true condition at the time of the crime. Psychological state of the accused. Issues of Matthew's mental health and his history of drug use, including cough syrup, were discussed, which could affect his behavior and perception of reality. Convincing evidence of Phelps' guilt was presented, including an analysis of his behavior before and after the crime, as well as the circumstances under which the murder was committed. Phelps called the rescue service and said that when he woke up, he found his wife's body next to him, claiming that he did not remember how he inflicted 123 wounds on her. During the investigation, it was found that Phelps was aware of his actions and even tried to hide evidence that indicated premeditation of the murder. The judge based his decision on extensive evidence presented by the prosecutor's office, including physical evidence and data obtained from Phelps's electronic devices. Lauren Hugelmeyer. Phelps and Matthew Phelps had serious problems in their marriage which worsened over time. One of the key aspects that caused tension was financial difficulties. Lauren, being a highly independent and hardworking woman, took on the main financial burden, working several jobs to support the family budget, while Matthew studied, aspiring to become a pastor. This created additional pressure on their relationship. In addition, there were disagreements between the couple about their future and lifestyle. Despite the fact that Lauren supported Matthew's aspirations, tension and frustration accumulated in their relationship due to unfulfilled expectations and lack of common goals. The conflicts were compounded by Matthew's personal problems, including his struggles with addiction and psychological issues which reportedly affected his behavior and relationship with Lauren. His instability and possible uncontrolled use of drugs could also contribute to tension in their relationship. Phelps tried to convince the court that his actions that night were unconscious and that he could not control his actions due to the effects of the drug. In support of his claims, he drew attention to the side effects of the drug, including the possibility of hallucinations and sleep paralysis, arguing that these conditions can lead to tragedy. However, Phelps's arguments were met with skepticism by the prosecutor's office and the court. The prosecutor's office presented evidence indicating that Phelps could have been aware of his actions and even tried to hide the traces of the crime after it was committed. In addition, experts brought in by the prosecution disputed the likelihood that cough medicine could lead to such extreme behavior as murder. The creators of the cough medicine, which Matthew Phelps mentioned in his defense, reacted to this case by emphasizing the safety and effectiveness of their products when used correctly. The company indicated that information about possible side effects and dosage recommendations are clearly indicated on the packaging and in the instructions for use. They also expressed their condolences to the victim's family, stressing that violence can never be justified and expressing deep sorrow over what happened. The final verdict in the Matthew Phelps case was announced after he pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of his wife, Lauren Hugelmeyer Phelps. This guilty plea was part of a deal with the prosecution that ruled out the possibility of the death penalty, resulting in Matthew being sentenced to life in prison without parole. During the announcement of the verdict, family members of both sides, friends, media representatives, and other interested persons were present in the courtroom. Matthew Phelps behaved with restraint during the announcement of the verdict, listening to the court's decision. His decision to plead guilty was motivated by a desire to avoid a harsher punishment and, perhaps, the hope that this would be perceived as a step towards redemption. In statements made in court, he expressed regret for his actions and apologized to his wife's family. The public reaction to the verdict was mixed. Some saw Phelps's admission of guilt as a sign of remorse and a step towards justice for Lauren and her family. Others, however, remained critical of his actions and the use of cough medicine-based protection as an excuse to commit murder, considering it an attempt to evade responsibility for his actions. Lauren's family and friends were relieved by the end of the trial, but stressed that no sentence would be able to compensate for the loss they had suffered. Many hoped that this case would highlight the need for addressing mental illness and addiction, as well as for implementing appropriate measures. Matthew Phelps initially pleaded not guilty to the charges. However, in October 2018, to avoid the death penalty, he confessed that his story about the cough and cold medicines was false and that he had feigned delirium during the 911 call to evade responsibility for his actions. "I feel like a monster, kind of unhappy. Part of the darkness that we don't talk about," Matthew said in a brief statement before being sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "It was a senseless act, and I regret every step that led me in this direction," Matthew stated. His defense team attempted to secure a reduced sentence by citing his troubled childhood and his struggle with depression. Nonetheless, since these factors do not excuse murder, he is currently serving his sentence at the Maury Correctional Institution in Hookerton, North Carolina, at the age of 32.
In July 2021, no one anticipated that the residents of Pinehurst would face an event so jarring it would irreversibly alter their serene community. Nestled in a quiet suburb, Pinehurst epitomized idyllic suburban life, with manicured lawns and white picket fences reflecting a perfect family existence. Neighbors exchanged warm greetings, children played outdoors until dark, and the local school served as the hub of social activities. Yet, beneath this seemingly flawless facade, dark secrets and mounting tensions were on the verge of exploding. At the core of this emerging crisis were the Martins. David, a 42-year-old real estate developer, and his wife Claire, a 39-year-old homemaker. David was renowned for his charm, business acumen, and the confidence that seemed to follow him everywhere. His success in real estate had established him as a prominent figure in Pinehurst, garnering both admiration and envy. Colleagues and clients respected his sharp intellect and persuasive abilities, which had led to numerous successful deals. Frequently seen at the local golf club, David was known for hosting clients and networking, his charisma making him the focal point of any gathering. Claire, in contrast, was the epitome of grace and dedication. She had left her career in event planning to devote herself entirely to raising their two children, Emily and Jack. Claire's life revolved around her family, and she was admired for her tireless involvement in school activities, charity events, and the community church. Her warm demeanor and natural elegance made her a beloved figure in Pinehurst, often seen organizing bake sales or volunteering at the local food bank. To outsiders, the Martins appeared to be the perfect couple, their marriage a cornerstone of their social circle. Living nearby was Emma Walsh, a 28-year-old kindergarten teacher who had recently moved to Pinehurst with her 5-year-old son, Noah. Emma had come to Pinehurst seeking refuge from a tumultuous past marked by a bitter divorce. With her warm smile and nurturing nature, Emma quickly became a cherished figure at Pinehurst Elementary School. She was dedicated to her students, often staying late to help with their projects or to speak with concerned parents. Noah, shy but bright, was the center of her world, and their bond was evident to all who saw them together. No one in Pinehurst could have predicted that these seemingly ordinary lives would collide in such a catastrophic way. David Martin had always been driven by ambition. Born into a modest family, he had worked tirelessly to achieve success. His parents, hardworking but financially struggling, had instilled in him a relentless work ethic. By his early 40s, David had become a prominent figure in the local real estate market. Known for his sharp business sense and smooth talking, his rise to the top had been marked by late nights, strategic networking, and an unwavering determination to provide his family with the life he had always dreamed of. Claire, on the other hand, came from an affluent background. The daughter of a retired judge and a social worker, she had been raised in comfort and security. Her upbringing had been filled with music lessons, summer camps, and family vacations to exotic destinations. She met David at a charity auction where his determination and charm immediately captivated her. Their courtship was swift, and they married within a year in a grand ceremony that cemented their status in the community. Their early years of marriage were blissful, filled with love, shared dreams, and the excitement of building a life together. David's career flourished, and Claire found fulfillment in raising their children, Emily and Jack. She was the perfect corporate wife, hosting lavish parties and engaging in community service. Her ability to balance the demands of motherhood with her social obligations made her a role model to many in Pinehurst. But as David's work demands grew, so did the distance between them. He often worked late, missing family dinners and school events, leaving Claire to navigate the challenges of parenthood alone. The once vibrant spark in their relationship began to dim, replaced by a growing sense of isolation and unspoken resentments. By the summer of 2021, the cracks in their marriage had deepened into chasms. David's absences became more frequent, and even when he was home, he was often preoccupied with work. His phone was a constant presence, buzzing with emails and messages that demanded his attention. Claire, now in her late 30s, struggled with feelings of isolation and dissatisfaction. She had sacrificed her career and personal ambitions to support David and raise their children, a decision that weighed heavily on her as she watched her husband become increasingly distant. David, for his part, was feeling the pressure of his success. The real estate market was competitive, and maintaining his status required constant effort. The stress of balancing work and family was taking its toll, and he found himself longing for an escape. It was during this time that he first met Emma Walsh at a neighborhood fundraiser. Her warmth and kindness were a stark contrast to the cold, tense atmosphere at home. They chatted briefly, sharing stories about their children and exchanging polite compliments. But for David, that brief encounter was enough to leave a lasting impression. Over the following months, their paths crossed more frequently at school events, community functions, and eventually through friendly text messages. Emma, still recovering from her divorce, found herself drawn to David's charisma and attentiveness. He made her feel valued and appreciated, emotions she hadn't felt in a long time. For David, Emma represented a respite from the pressures of his career and the tension at home. Their friendship quickly blossomed into a secret affair filled with stolen moments and clandestine meetings. Their first kiss happened in late June at the local park where Noah and Emily played together. David had offered to help Emma carry a heavy box of supplies for a school project. As they stood in the shade of an old oak tree, their conversation took a personal turn. Emma confided in David about her struggles as a single mother and her fears for the future. David, moved by her vulnerability, reached out to comfort her. Their kiss was electric, igniting a passion that neither had felt in years. From that moment, they were inseparable. They met in secluded spots around Pinehurst, rented motel rooms, and even risked encounters at Emma's home when Noah was at school. The affair gave David a sense of excitement and renewal, while Emma felt alive and desired. Yet the guilt gnawed at them both. Emma worried about the impact on her son and her career. David, though increasingly distant from Claire, still felt pangs of remorse for betraying his family. As the summer wore on, their secret became harder to keep. Close calls and suspicious glances from neighbors added to their anxiety. Claire, already on edge, began to notice David's frequent absences and distracted behavior. The tension in the Martin household reached a boiling point, setting the stage for the tragic events that would soon unfold. David and Emma's relationship grew deeper with each passing day. The excitement of their secret affair provided a much-needed escape for David, who found himself increasingly disillusioned with his work and home life. For Emma, being with David made her feel desired and valued in a way she hadn't felt since before her marriage fell apart. However, the guilt of their actions gnawed at them both. Emma worried constantly about the impact their affair might have on her son and her career. She feared the scandal that would erupt if their relationship was discovered, and the potential damage to her reputation and her ability to provide for Noah. Despite these fears, she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. David, though increasingly distant from Claire, still felt pangs of remorse for betraying his family. He often found himself lying awake at night, torn between his obligations to his wife and children, and his longing for the happiness he found with Emma. As the summer wore on, their secret became increasingly difficult to keep. Close calls and suspicious glances from neighbors added to their anxiety. One afternoon, they narrowly avoided being seen by a neighbor while stealing a quick kiss behind a row of bushes at the park. On another occasion, Claire found a receipt from a cafe that David had visited with Emma, leading to an awkward confrontation that David barely managed to deflect. Claire, already on edge from the growing emotional distance in her marriage, began to notice David's frequent absences and distracted behavior. She observed how he seemed to be constantly checking his phone, how he often had vague excuses for coming home late, and how he seemed more irritable and detached than ever. The tension in the Martin household reached a boiling point, with arguments becoming a regular occurrence. Claire's frustration and suspicion grew, but she hesitated to confront David directly, fearing the confirmation of her worst suspicions. David and Emma's love affair, once a source of excitement and joy, became a labyrinth of lies and deception. Each secret meeting carried the risk of exposure, and the thrill of their forbidden relationship was increasingly overshadowed by the weight of their guilt and the fear of discovery. As they navigated this precarious balance, the strain began to take its toll on both of them. David's performance at work started to suffer, and Emma found it harder to concentrate on her teaching. By the end of July, the tension was palpable. Emma suggested they take a break, hoping that some distance might help them gain perspective. David reluctantly agreed, but the separation only heightened their longing for each other. They continued to text and call, their conversations filled with a mix of longing, regret, and the desperate hope that they could find a way to be together without destroying their lives. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change their lives forever. The lies, secrets, and simmering emotions were all about to collide in a way that none of them could have anticipated. As the days grew shorter and the air thicker with the oppressive heat of summer, the once peaceful community of Pinehurst was on the brink of a scandal that would leave it forever changed. On July 25, 2021, the day dawned oppressively hot, the air thick with humidity. The weather seemed to mirror the simmering tension that was about to erupt in the tranquil community of Pinehurst. It was a Sunday, a day typically reserved for family gatherings and relaxation. Residents of Pinehurst went about their routines, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their midst. David had concocted a plausible excuse to spend the afternoon with Emma at her house. He told Claire he needed to meet a client, a routine part of his job that usually didn't raise suspicion. Meanwhile, Emma had arranged for Noah to attend a friend's birthday party, ensuring they would have the house to themselves. The plan seemed foolproof. Claire, however, had grown increasingly suspicious of David's frequent absences and vague explanations. That morning, she watched him closely, noting the unusual care he took in choosing his clothes and the slight tremor in his hands as he grabbed his keys. Her intuition screamed that something was amiss. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to follow him. David drove through the winding streets of Pinehurst, oblivious to the car following him at a cautious distance. Claire's heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. When she saw him turn into Emma's driveway, her worst fears were confirmed. She parked a distance away, her mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Inside Emma's charming, modest home, the atmosphere was one of stolen bliss. The lovers were blissfully unaware of the impending confrontation. They relaxed on the couch, David's arm draped around Emma's shoulders, their fingers intertwined. They talked softly, laughed, and enjoyed the rare moments of peace and intimacy that their clandestine relationship afforded them. Claire sat in her car, trying to steady her racing heart and gather her thoughts. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. The sound of laughter coming from within the house was a dagger to her heart. The walls of her carefully constructed life were crumbling, and she could no longer stand the uncertainty. She had to confront them to face the truth head-on. With a surge of resolve fueled by heartbreak and fury, Claire exited her car and approached the front door. She hesitated for a moment, the sounds of laughter and intimacy from within fueling her anger. Without knocking, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The scene she walked into was nothing short of a nightmare. David and Emma sprang apart, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. For a brief, intense moment, the room was filled with a deafening silence, the air thick with unspoken accusations and raw emotions. Claire's face was a mask of rage and betrayal. Her eyes locked onto David's, demanding answers. What the hell is going on here? Claire's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and hurt. David, caught off guard, stammered, "Claire, I can explain." But Claire was beyond listening. Her fury boiled over, transforming her hurt into a powerful, almost unstoppable force. Words flew between them, sharp and painful, each accusation cutting deeper than the last. Emma, caught in the middle, tried to intervene, her voice pleading for calm, but her attempts were futile against the tidal wave of Claire's wrath. "You betrayed me," Claire screamed, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to our family?" David reached out, trying to placate her, but his touch only intensified her anger. In a blind rage, Claire's eyes fell on a heavy vase on the mantel. Before anyone could react, she grabbed it and lunged at David. The first blow landed on his shoulder, sending him reeling backward. But Claire, fueled by a mix of rage and heartbreak, did not stop. She struck again and again, each blow landing with a sickening thud. Emma, horrified, fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The operator's voice seemed distant and unreal as she described the unfolding nightmare. "Please hurry. There's been an attack. Someone is seriously hurt." David's cries of pain filled the room, each one more desperate than the last. Blood splattered across the walls, the floor, and Claire herself. She was a woman possessed, her fury driving her to act without thought, without restraint. Emma could only watch in horror, as the love of her life was beaten to a bloody pulp right before her eyes. "Stay with me," Emma screamed into the phone, her voice frantic. "He's not moving. There's so much blood." The operator's voice was calm, but it barely registered with Emma. Her world was a whirlwind of chaos and terror. She shouted their address, her words barely coherent through her sobs. The room reeked of coppery blood, and the sight of David's lifeless body was seared into her mind. David, bleeding and dazed, tried to defend himself. his arms raised to ward off Claire's relentless assault. Blood spattered across the room, staining the furniture and walls. Claire's anger had transformed her into a force of nature, her movements fueled by years of pent-up frustration and betrayal. David's body eventually ceased to move, his moans fading into a ghastly silence. Claire stood over him, panting heavily, the vase slipping from her bloodied hands and shattering on the floor. Her eyes were wide and wild, her mind grappling with the horror of what she had just done. By the time the police arrived, the living room was a scene of utter devastation. Furniture was overturned, blood was splattered across the walls, and David was almost unrecognizable by the size of his lethal wounds. Claire stood over him, the vase still clutched in her trembling hands, her face a mask of anguish and disbelief at what she had done. The officers quickly subdued Claire, gently prying the vase from her grasp and leading her away in handcuffs. She did not resist, her body limp and her eyes vacant, as if the reality of her actions had yet to fully sink in. Emma, still in shock, tried to answer the officers' questions, her voice shaky and broken. Paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize David, but he was long gone. There was nothing they could do, as Claire had made sure to eliminate him in the most brutal way possible, so that this man would never dare or be able to betray his family again. The aftermath of the violence cast a profound silence over the previously tranquil home. Neighbors congregated outside, drawn by the blare of sirens and the sight of flashing lights, their faces marked by shock and curiosity. The tightly knit community of Pinehurst was left to contend with the sudden and brutal destruction of its idyllic veneer. As the sun set on that sweltering day, the storm brewing within the Martins' hearts finally burst forth, leaving a path of devastation in its wake. The once peaceful Pinehurst would never be the same, the echoes of that fateful day haunting its residents for years to come. Claire Martin's trial became a national sensation, shining a spotlight on the dark secrets concealed behind Pinehurst's white picket fences. The courtroom was packed with reporters, residents, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the unfolding drama. Claire's defense hinged on a plea of temporary insanity, triggered by the intense emotional turmoil of discovering her husband's affair. Conversely, the prosecution portrayed a scene of premeditated violence, arguing that Claire had meticulously planned her actions in a fit of calculated rage. The testimonies were heart-wrenching, exposing the depths of despair and betrayal that led to that fateful day. Emma, struggling to keep her composure, described the affair and the guilt that had tormented them both. David's colleagues and friends highlighted his charm and ambition, while neighbors recounted the escalating tension between the Martins. In a dramatic turn, Claire took the stand, her voice quivering as she recounted the events that drove her to such a desperate act. She spoke of years of sacrifice, feeling increasingly isolated and undervalued as David's career overshadowed their family. Her words starkly reminded everyone of the delicate balance between love and duty, and the devastating fallout when that balance is disrupted. On July 11, 2013, 21-year-old Jordan Lynn Graham drove with her foster brother, Michael, and her close friend, Hannah, up Going to the Sun Road, a 30-mile stretch of narrow, winding path leading to a dangerous mountain overlook, in search of her husband, who had disappeared on July 8, 2013. Acting on a suspicious tip from a Gmail account named Carmen Tony 607, they were scouring Glacier National Park for signs of Cody Johnson, who some unnamed acquaintances allegedly saw go off a cliff. The message claimed, "They are certain he fell, and he is dead, Jordan." Cody's family and friends joined the possible widow in combing over 1,500 square miles of rugged wilderness, including winding trails, fast-flowing rivers, cliffs, mountain lions, and grizzly bears. Despite the numerous location suggestions from Michael and Hannah, Jordan insisted on taking that particular route, claiming she had a feeling. At the very top, they stopped at a parking lot and hiked up the loop trail. It was an extremely steep trail leading up to a 200-foot cliff overlooking a deep ravine. Jordan navigated her way to the top with practiced ease and hopped past jagged rocks to the very edge of the cliff overlooking the ravine. Peering over it, she threw a rock off and said, "I think he's down there." It took a particularly brave FBI agent tying himself to a tree and leaning over the edge, and the aid of several emergency services and a helicopter to confirm and extract the body at the bottom of the ravine. The body belonged to Cody Johnson, a newlywed car enthusiast, businessman, and a pillar of the community. How did Cody end up here, and what did his wife and the mysterious car man Tony 607 have to do with it? And who were the mysterious out-of-town friends that were with Cody when he fell? These were the questions that hounded the Kalispell Police Department for days to come. Cody Johnson was born on April 8, 1989 in San Jose, California, and he grew up with his mother, Sherry Johnson, whom he was intimately close to. They moved to Kalispell in northwestern Montana in 2002. It is a small tourist town in Flathead Valley, located between a lake with the same name and Glacier National Park. Cody spent most of his childhood exploring the great outdoors, driving on long trails with his friend, and kindling his lifelong obsession with all things cars. According to Cody's friends and family, he was real. He was personable, charismatic, and selfless. He was one of those rare types of people who wouldn't hesitate to go the extra mile to help you once they got to know you. Cody was also lucky enough to grow his lifelong interest in cars into a thriving business. It started with modifications and souping up cars for racing in his teenage years, but it did eventually evolve to include commercial cars. Cody was a custom commercial car builder, but he also had a job at Nomad Communications, where he worked with his uncle and several of his car-loving friends. It also didn't hurt that his childhood best friend, Cameron Fredrickson, was his boss. Life was pretty much perfect for Cody. The only thing missing was somebody to share that life with. At 23, Cody was in the market for a life partner. He talked to his friends about wanting to marry a church girl, and on Halloween 2011, he met Jordan, the woman who'd change his life forever. Born in August 1991, Jordan Lynn Graham lived in Kalispell all her life with her family. She grew up deeply religious and attended the Faith Baptist Church, where she babysat children and worked with families. Her whole life revolved around her faith. All her friends were in church, and it was her dream to one day become a stay-at-home mother and raise a family. Jordan and Cody hit it off when they met on Halloween 2011. She was initially shy before she opened up, and they got to talking. She told Cody about her dreams of starting a family and how much she loved nature and the outdoors. Jordan liked Cody, but she was only 20 years old at the time and was not looking to start anything serious. They went on a few dates, but remained just friends. All that changed when Cody began to seriously pursue her. He joined her church, First Baptist, and began to move in the same circles as she did. It wasn't long before their casual relationship evolved into something more, at least for one of them. They started dating officially in November 2011, and Cody was entirely taken by her. He adored her and wanted to be with her day and night. According to Sherry Johnson, Cody was sure he wanted to marry Jordan a few weeks into their relationship. Even when Jordan told him she wanted to maintain her chastity until marriage, he didn't change his mind. The people who knew the couple well, however, noticed that Jordan didn't seem to feel as passionately for Cody as he did for her. Some chalked it up to her shy nature, but others were a bit more apprehensive of the lopsided relationship. They were not affectionate in public, didn't hold hands, or even flirt. Most of Jordan's friends were surprised when she said yes to Cody's proposal that followed 1 year later in December 2012. They thought she was not serious enough to get married after 1 year of dating, but were happy for her nonetheless. In an Instagram post, Jordan flaunted her new ring with the caption, "He proposed. Best early Christmas present ever. Smiley face." The marriage was slated for June 29, 2013, and immediately started planning. Cody was heavily involved, as was Kimberly Martinez, Jordan's best friend and matron of honor. However, it was Jordan who seemed the most interested in the wedding planning. She even performed a song the couple hired a professional songwriter, Elizabeth Shea, to write. The lyrics of the song seemed chillingly prophetic in hindsight. When Kimberly or anybody else broached the topic of actually being married to Cody, however, her mood soured. She asked her matron, Kimberly, several times over if she was doing the right thing, and on her wedding day, her true feelings about the union were impossible to hide. She was a nervous wreck. She was looking down a lot and didn't seem like she wanted to make eye contact with her husband. When it was time for wedding photos, Jordan seemed to have recovered well enough. And by the time they had their first dance, she was entirely focused on Cody. However, this bliss would not last for long. The morning after their wedding, she texted her friend from the hotel they were honeymooning from. She hadn't consummated their marriage and turned her husband away the first night of their wedding and the 6 other nights following that. It turned out that Jordan was deathly afraid of sex. A combination of her faith and her true feelings towards Cody made her nervous about being intimate with him. Pressure continued to mount until July 7th, 8 days after their wedding. Cody was supposed to go golfing with friends, but he canceled at the last minute because Jordan had a surprise for him. After church and some alone time on the lake, the couple sat down to a communal dinner with a few of their friends at the local Dairy Queen. Cody went home with Jordan, and that was the last time anyone saw him. Cameron Fredrickson was the first to notice Cody's absence. He was a model employee and always arrived before the workday started. When Cody hadn't turned up far into the workday, Cameron stopped by Cody's new house that he'd bought with Jordan before their wedding. After knocking for a while with no answer, he got a little worried and let himself in. No one was in, so he searched the house looking for hints as to where Cody and Jordan could have disappeared to with very little success. Cameron's worry morphed into fear when he found Cody's phone in the garage. Immediately, he knew something was wrong. Cody went everywhere with his phone. Leaving it behind could have been a sign that something horrible might have happened to him. Several calls later, Cameron discovered that no one had seen him since the dinner at Dairy Queen at 8:30. Cameron went to the police station immediately to file a missing persons report, and the authorities took the case seriously from the get-go. Cameron's distress made it difficult not to. Officer Chaz Zimmerman was one of the first people to question Cameron. He found it strange that it was his boss who reported him missing, not his wife. Later that day, Kimberly finally got a hold of Jordan, and when she asked what happened, Jordan said the following.
She said that she seen him leave with some buddies in a black car washing templates.
She told them that on their way back from the restaurant, he got a phone call that made him very upset, so she decided to give him some space. However, later that night, she went to the garage to get her phone charger that she supposedly left in their car. On her way back from the car, she got a text from Cody that said the following.
I got a message saying that he was going to go for a ride with some of his out-of-town buddies that were visiting. I had no idea who they were, but he always told me this one thing is when his friends came to visit, he would take them to Glacier Park.
She told the police what she told Kimberly and expanded further. She told them she didn't recognize any of the men, and they hadn't fought that night. As for the reason for his disappearance, Jordan claimed she thought Cody was likely joyriding with his out-of-town friends. When the police pressed about why she didn't report the disappearance, she claimed she didn't want to upset him by filing a missing person report if he was going to come back in a few hours. 48 hours after the disappearance, Cody and Jordan's friends and families had gathered in their family home, and at this point, expressed confusion at Cody's behavior. It didn't sound like him to abandon his wife and tell no one where he was going. Still, Jordan stuck to her story until Kimberly confronted her. The longer the impromptu meeting went on, the more uncomfortable she seemed to get. Eventually, Jordan got so agitated that she threw her wedding ring across the room. Some thought it was her odd way of coping, but Kimberly was convinced there was something else going on. She called her friend when she got home. The next day, Jordan was called into the station and confronted by the officers about her inconsistent accounts.
I'm getting some inconsistencies in what you're telling me with other information that I've already gathered, okay? And I've spoke to a few people, and it's important that I know that you're telling me the truth on things.
And what I know.
Well,
I mean,
and I understand that, okay? But I think that there's more.
Sherry Johnson also saw the police sometime that day, armed with Cody's phone records from the day of the disappearance. She was worried about her son and hoped the mysterious man Cody called would shed some light on his whereabouts. But it ended up being a car friend calling to return a tool to Cody. He was immediately eliminated as a suspect because he had a rock-solid alibi. His wife was in labor when Cody disappeared. With all of their leads exhausted, the police turned their attention back to Jordan. She clearly had a story to tell, but it wasn't adding up. The break in the case they were desperate for came on July 10th. A mysterious message came from an email, Carmen Tony 607, and it declared that Cody was dead, and they could call off the search. Hello, Jordan. My name is Tony. There is no bother looking for Cody anymore. He is gone. Jordan approached Hannah with the email, face devoid of emotion, and told her about what Carmen Tony 607 said happened to Cody. He'd supposedly slipped and fell off a cliff in Glacier National Park with his mysterious friends. Hannah nearly lost it when she read the message, and she had to push a lethargic Jordan to go to the police. Instead of putting the police investigation to rest, the email only made them more paranoid. It seemed very convenient that an anonymous email would provide the information they were desperately searching for and advise them to call off the search. What alarmed Detective Corey Clark more than the particulars of the message was Jordan's lack of emotion. She didn't seem affected by a message basically confirming her husband's death. Based on the information in that email, Jordan decided to go to Glacier National Park with her close friends and family to search for Cody. Hannah described Jordan as strangely chipper the entire ride up the park. They found nothing by the end of the first day and resumed their search on the second. And it was then Jordan miraculously found Cody's body. The coroner said that his head and arms took most of the damage from the fall. Cody's family and friends were devastated at the loss, but Jordan was relieved, according to Hannah. Now that a body was found, the police would stop investigating. But the problem was the police still had no idea who Carmen Tony 607 was. When Jordan was initially questioned about the message, she pointed them at Tony Stalkup, a fellow car enthusiast and acquaintance of Cody. He hadn't seen Cody in several months, but he was so concerned for him that he allowed them full access to his accounts. They did not find the email address they were looking for, and both Jordan and Cody's phone records did not reveal much. So they had to reach out to Google to subpoena the IP address of Carmen Tony 607. Pending the arrival of the information, the police re-interviewed Cody's family and friends, and it was then Kimberly finally told the police about Jordan's fragile mental state leading up to the marriage. She asked her several times if she should marry Cody and expressed horror and fear at the thought of having sex with him. She regretted marrying Cody and wished she could take everything back. When Kim told her to tell Cody how she felt, she messaged her, "I should be happy, but I'm not. If I tell him, it's going to break his heart." 2 days before Cody disappeared, she typed this, "He held me down the other night, and he was in my face." And then on July 7th, they uncovered this exchange. She'd intended to talk to him and was terrified of how he'd react. Later that day, she ended up at Kim's house and told her how the talk with Cody went. Not well. She said Cody got really angry and freaked out, and she decided to leave so that he could cool off. She spent the night at her step-parents' home. When the police learned about this, Jordan became an even more likely suspect, and the information from Google arrived around the same time. It confirmed that Carmen Tony 607's email address was generated from a computer at her stepfather's home. A short interview with each member of the Graham family painted Jordan as the creator, but that was not damning evidence enough. Cody and Jordan's cell phone records were. The cell towers put them at Glacial National Park the night of Cody's disappearance. CCTV cameras also captured pictures of the couple entering Glacial Park at 9:17 p.m. after she denied being with her husband that night. On July 18, 2013, the police called Jordan in, and when they presented her with evidence, she broke down into tears. She finally told the detective her version of what happened on the July 8th. According to her, she confessed how she felt about their marriage to Cody, and they got into a huge argument. They both decided to go on a trip to Glacier National Park and headed for the loop. Jordan finishes the story in her own words.
So he would have fallen face first down the hill. Why did you continue to turn around and then push him off?
I think it's because emotions were running so high. I was frustrated, I was angry, I was every emotion I could ever think of, all at once.
Her comment at the blindfold had the detectives eager to make a connection between a stray scarf at the bottom of the confession Jordan gave. Nothing was eventually proven. Jordan also claimed that Cody's death was accidental and that no part of her planted the assault she would later come to receive. When asked why she pushed her husband Cody off the bridge, she said the following.
She stated that he had turned his back to her, he was facing the cliff, and that's when she went up to him and with both hands pushed him in the back off the cliff.
Jordan also confessed to creating Carmen Tony 607 at her stepfather's house and sending the messages. Jordan walked out of the police that day, surprisingly still a free woman. The police did not charge her and wouldn't charge her until July 22nd at Cody's funeral, where she was texting on her phone. This one act of disrespect evaporated any sympathy anyone had left for Jordan. Rumors had been circling that Jordan had killed Cody to escape their marriage because it was the only way she could take back her decision without disgracing herself and her family. If Cody were dead, she wouldn't need to divorce him. Her attitude at his funeral all but confirmed those rumors. People were beginning to question whether Jordan ever loved Cody. Jordan was charged with first, second-degree murder and making false statements. The jury also added the charge of premeditated first-degree murder after reviewing her case. Her trial finally started on December 9, 2013. The prosecution ruthlessly came after Jordan the moment the trial started, and a few days in, things were not looking good for her. They picked apart her story, raising vital questions like why she lied and led Cody's friends and family on whether she was innocent and remorseful about her actions. The testimony from Cody's family and loved ones certainly didn't help her case. It painted her as a callous and unfeeling wife who murdered her husband to get out of sleeping with him. Her defense tried to argue self-defense, but it didn't look like they'd win, so Jordan went for a plea deal for second-degree murder. She would get 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole, in exchange for the prosecution dropping the charge of first-degree murder. However, before her sentencing, Jordan changed her mind and tried to retract her plea when she heard the prosecution plan to go after her for premeditated first-degree murder. It carried a maximum sentence of 50 years, and it was up to U.S. District Judge Donald Malloy to decide whether to honor her plea or start a new trial. On December 13, 2013, Jordan Lynn Graham was sentenced to 30 years and 5 months in prison and ordered to pay a fine of $16,910 in restitution to Cody's family. She took the stand during her sentencing hearing to apologize for killing Cody. She claimed to be in shock when it happened. "I wasn't thinking where we were. I just pushed," she explained to the judge. Over the years, Jordan would try over and over to get a reduced sentence on several grounds. Her final one was in 2016, but her case was never reopened or reviewed. The federal prosecution was determined to make a statement of her case.
The sentence today is going to send a message that if you kill someone and are subject to federal jurisdiction, you will be prosecuted swiftly and severely punished for your crime.
Jordan will not be leaving prison until she is over 52 years old.
Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.